Brexit. This whole thing, the debates, the arguments, the endless negotiations, it all kicked off in 2016 when almost 17 million people voted for the UK to leave the EU. That was 1 million more than voted to remain. But now the whole thing seems so messy and complicated that some people say the only way to resolve the situation is to have yet another vote and ask the public to do it all over again. But could there really be a second referendum? Now yes, obviously some people would support a second referendum and others are completely against it. But for now we're just asking, is it even possible? And if so, what would it look like? Well, Theresa May has already said she won't hold another public vote on Brexit. But she could be forced to do it if enough MPs decide to push legislation through Parliament. In other words, it's possible that Theresa May might not have a choice. But there's still lots of unanswered questions. First up, what would actually be on the ballot paper? Back in 2016, all this seemed so straightforward. A simple choice between leaving the EU or remaining in it. But, well, as we've seen over the last 2 years, leaving the EU could happen in lots of very different ways. In fact, we did a whole video looking at all the variations with soft Brexit, hard Brexit, and somewhere in between Brexit. You see, at the moment, we're not just part of the EU's political systems, we're also part of the EU institutions like the single market, the customs union, and the European Court of Justice. So when people voted in 2016, well, what did they actually want? Did they want us to break off all connection with everything? Or should we still be, I don't know, part of the EU's customs union or something or well, anything? Now, of course, plenty of politicians claim that they know what the people really wanted when they voted to leave the EU. But the reality is, none of these complex questions were on the 2016 ballot paper, so it's all just speculation. The only thing we really know for sure is that most voters wanted to leave the EU. We don't know how they wanted to leave. So, if there was a second referendum, it probably wouldn't be exactly the same as the last one. Instead, people might be given more options to choose from. So, what could these options be? Well, one of them would probably be the draft deal that Theresa May has agreed with the EU. Supporters of her plan say she's managed to find a good, pragmatic compromise, but her opponents say it's the worst of both worlds. Whatever you think of it, right now it's the only deal on the table. So if there is another referendum, this is very likely to be one of the options. Another possible option would be to cancel Brexit altogether and remain in the EU.
Bonjour.
Many Brexiteers, though, say this shouldn't be on the ballot paper. They say the question of whether the UK should leave the EU has already been settled by the last referendum in 2016. On the flip side, people campaigning for a second referendum say, hold on, it's now become a lot clearer what Brexit would actually involve, and people might have changed their mind. And they also say there are big questions about the Leave side's campaign tactics. So if Remainers campaigning for a second vote get their way, this option is also likely to be on the ballot. What about that third choice then? Well, some Brexit supporters say if people don't like Theresa May's deal, they should be able to vote for the UK to leave the EU without any deal at all. But again, lots of people will be against this idea because they're worried that leaving with no deal could lead to economic chaos. Ultimately, the decision on what questions are on the ballot paper will be up to MPs and the Electoral Commission. But at the moment, it looks likely we'd have a choice between all three of these options. Wait a minute! Two of these options are different versions of Brexit, but there's only one Remain option. That would divide up the Brexit supporters and reduce their votes, which might not sound very fair.
Oh no.
One solution then would be to give voters more than one choice. The referendum could use a system called the alternative vote, and it basically allows you to rank the options in order of preference. Initially, only people's first preferences are added up. If they don't reach the 50% mark needed to win, then the second preferences are included as well. So a three-way vote is possible. Ish. Experts say it would take weeks and weeks just to plan it all properly. And that's a problem because time is running out. We're currently set to leave the EU on the 29th of March 2019. So if Parliament does decide to call a second referendum, it's already kind of too late. To get around this, the government would have to buy extra time and ask the EU to delay Brexit. And that's only going to make Brexit supporters even more angry. And the problems don't end there. Lots of the same issues that made people angry last time around could come back round all over again. For one thing, should young people be allowed to vote this time? In most UK elections, you've got to be 18 to vote, but there are calls for it to be lowered to 16. In fact, 16-year-olds were allowed to vote in another referendum back in 2014 over Scottish independence. Now, some people say, of course they should be allowed to vote. After all, it's them who will live with the effects of Brexit for the longest. But others say this is just a cynical attempt to try and swing the vote because, well, we know that young people are much more likely to vote Remain. So if they were given a chance to vote in a second referendum, it might just look like a stitch-up in favour of Remainers. Ultimately, it's hard to say whether a second referendum would actually put an end to all this Brexit chaos. It mainly just depends on your viewpoint. Yes, technically it is possible, but it might actually just make even more political chaos. Either way, the issue is not going away anytime soon. So in the meantime, please hit subscribe for all our other animated explainers, reports and loads more.